Just because you built a pig pen with one, lesser funding, two, lesser ceiling of aspiration, three, no ability to compete with other mediums or schools in university, that doesn't mean that that brings out the largest margin of employability. That doesn't mean that you're making an effort for being inclusive and integrating people with disabilities in the real world. At best, what you get is you play pretend like these people have a playground, and at worst you bring no margin of success for these individuals because you alienate them towards invisibility. First, why do we really need to have an integration effort for PWD in the first place? There's a clear understanding that in both sides, we long for rebuilding institution that allows this minority to have a proper utility to perform well. As we have stated, these PWDs are diverse. Oftentimes, they want to be treated the same way on how you treat someone with complete limbs, with proper bodily functions. The problem is in opposition, you limit the ability of them to compete further. We explained that in the status quo, there's numerous PWD that can actually whoop your ass in academics, in debate, and any other medium of education, like Kelvin, for instance, or Paul, for instance. The problem is on the status quo, the limitation of our ability to recognize them is far less. That's why only few selected individuals are placed within these corridors. Oftentimes, the reason why they don't push to be in Harvard, they don't push to be in UP, in any other mainstream school, is because their own parents are insulated with a societal vacuum that pulls them in quote-unquote exclusive schools for PWD. The problem is, in these corridors, despite of them being as smart or even smarter, the societal expectation that we have built forward limits them to invisibility. That is why the reason from the opposition and why we need to build more school doesn't really prosper in this debate. And that is what we reap forward inside proposition. So the comparative here is that this makes institutions and other tenets of our society to push for deprioritization of their applications for this institution or mainstream institution that we have mentioned. Because one, they would rather choose a healthy varsity player. Number two, they would rather choose someone for a dominant background. All of which are not correlated to your direct effort as an individual, because even if you want paraplegic medals, for instance, this is not valued in your application in comparison to IB sports. So there's a limit of vacuum that are currently unfair because it's made for the majority. The problem is we also need to have the minority standards that allows them to have proper equity. This is why in the status quo, only few selected individuals are placed within these backgrounds, even though they have the greatest ability to compete with normal people. These external factors are currently bigoted, and the current bigoted societal expectation that we have limits them on the ground. That's why their parents are much more confident to put them in a quote-unquote exclusionary school, even though they deserve better, even though they want to be a lawyer that can actually compete with, I don't know, maybe Jesus Falsis. Second, why is the very process of creating more schools for PWD exclusively remains inefficient in the status quo? Clearly, opposition seems to be outside of the reality to push forward quantity over quality of this institution. Because currently, there's a load of a mountain problem within these institutions in the first place. It goes as follows. One, they have very bad facility and tends to accept less students because they don't have enough budgets. Number two, the teachers that are being placed here are never going to be as competitive with the mainstream universities. They do it for advocacies, but oftentimes it's not enough for students that wants to push forward into a specialized field like law, medicine, engineering. We think this is absurd, and we think that we should not limit these opportunities for them because their disabilities doesn't mean that they cannot wish to be a lawyer, wish to be an engineer, for instance, or wish to be a doctor, because that doesn't define their own cognitive function. Number three, if you build more institutions, it doesn't mean that the demand for them expands. Note, PWDs are placed in the minorities. Institution, even if it's for the sake of advocacy, is still face fiscal limitation. That's why I want to ask, what is the real goal of opposition? Because it seems like they want to build more institutions that co-opt for the minority. The problem is those institutions that they are going to build are going to be blanched by logistical problems. Sure, I'll take the PY.
So the goal of the opposition is that we're gonna make a school with a great ecosystem for the heterogeneous and not burden the school to split the resource between the normal student and the disability student.
What do you mean they're going to split resources? They don't need to split resources because this mainstream school earns a lot gradually to the point that they can create special spaces for this, or maybe they can create DEI, for instance. The case from your side of bullying and all of that stuff remains symmetrical in this debate, because even if they do graduate in your side, they're not going to be employed. Why? Because they are from an exclusionary school. They don't have the competitive, substantive means to be, one, employable, two, they're going to just face all of the discrimination that you have pushed forward in the job market because you don't insulate them within the educational field that they have. One, in the pursuit of building more, you need to find newer professors in their side. Most of the time, this also dampens the quality of their faculties. Because let's be real, mainstream universities keeps on expanding. More qualified teachers will be there over time. While comparatively, they will face less demand in their world for the schools because oftentimes they cannot really earn that much by the limited pool of population that they rely on. That's why currently, PWDs doesn't really study in this institution that much. Why? Because currently it's really expensive. But maybe, their deputy will say that, more institution equals more diverse competition equals more cheaper pricing. No, that's not the case here because you're limited with the facets of ceiling that I have mentioned. You only need to rely on a limited pool of population. That's why in their world, despite of someone like Ayan, for instance, who were born with talents for engineering, or maybe like Brent, for instance, who were born with aspirations to be an economist, they don't really chase it because we don't allow them to have proper allocation of spaces for them. At best, even if these institutions are subsidized by the states, it's never enough. That's why it is just placed as a last resort, and that's why we keep on forwarding why they need to be integrated in the majority vacuum that allows them to compete gradually. Why? Because why does it need to be placed in mainstream university? One, mainstream university has the most corporal capability to expand because in the long run, they earn profit gradually. This is the reason why they are the proper avenue to expand opportunities for these individuals. The very reason why they push for these efforts is for them to be more inclusive, is because the current barrier that they have for the selection process in the Ivy League, for instance, is placed in a standard that are really unfair for these minorities. That's why if we push them more, maybe they can create an equity or a proper ground for them in order for us to reach the proper standard for PWDs, for instance. They don't need to be judged for maybe their sports aspiration, maybe their CV for debate, for instance, or CV for any other sports for normal people, because they can just simply create a standard that actually depends on SATs, for instance. So in our world, one, you beat the bigoted barriers for selection process. Two, you beat the pool of societal expectation for PWDs. And three, we create a society where the students are actually employable and competitive within the market.